In Japan, there is a pandemic going around. No, it's not the one you are probably thinking of. COVID 19 is, well, yes, it has been making its rounds around the world and certainly throughout Japan. There is another pandemic that is plaguing Japan right now, and I have to say I'm not really surprised. Here we go. This is the plague I was talking about. More people died of suicide in Japan in 1 month than the entire coronavirus pandemic. Now, let's make sure not to mince words here. This is specific to Japan. So, for Japan, their suicide rate is higher than the number of deaths that have occurred in Japan as a result um, of the coronavirus pandemic. Some may say, good for them, but at the same time, at what cost? Clearly, it is having a toll. It's not arguing with science to say that humans are social creatures by nature. We have historically always grown and developed in groups for a long time, started off small as cavemen tribes, which then ultimately changed into larger towns, settlements, and developed into advanced civilizations. This is how we have evolved and stayed alive, is our reliance on each other for survival. So it's ingrained in our DNA to be social creatures by nature. It is scientifically proven and backed by multiple credible sources of empirical evidence throughout the psychological community to create the assertion that that isolation will have a eventually isolation will have a significant mental effect on everybody who is partaking in it. So this is sort of the question that I found. I found this interesting, but it is definitely newsworthy. Japan is struggling with a mental health crisis as the coronavirus pandemic rages on, with more people dying in 1 month from suicide than from COVID 19 all year long. The National Police Agency said suicides surged to 2,153 in October alone, with more than 17,000 people taking their own lives this year to date. That is a staggeringly large number for a completely preventable death. By comparison, fewer than 2,000 people in the country have died from COVID 19 in 2020. That is remarkably low. However, I am aware that early on, during the earliest bouts of the COVID 19 outbreak, they had some of the harshest and most strict reactions to it. Japan also obviously has a geographical advantage in the sense that they are an island nation, so for them it is very easy to isolate any kind of, or easier, I should say, than most countries to isolate any sort of biological outbreak, disease, or infection, rather. Experts say the pandemic has exacerbated mental health issues due to prolonged lockdowns, isolation from family members, unemployment and other financial concerns, and a lack of school structure. We need to seriously confront reality, Chief Government Spokesman Katsunobu Kato said this week, announcing new initiatives to help people via suicide hotlines and social media outreach. Japan has historically had high rates of suicide, but the numbers had begun trending downward. Now, that's actually surprising to me. I, um, I was aware that people from Japan were more likely to suffer from depression. However, I wasn't actually aware that like, to some degree, I feel like that it must be like some version of a cultural factor that hasn't been taken into account. Japanese authorities increased suicide prevention funding, adding an additional 10 million to the $24 million budget. Wow, $34 million budget. And that's just purely spent on services for depression and suicide prevention, hotlines and mental health facilities and and whatnot. That's actually pretty staggering. This is going to be a much shorter video, guys. I just wanted to give you this. I found this particularly interesting, and it raises a very important point for me personally. Um, as someone who has personally struggled with mental health issues my entire life, it 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 one, it strikes home, but also there's a very there's a fine balance that has to be observed when you're looking at coronavirus. Um, there's a fine balance that has to be observed when you're talking about the lockdowns, and you're looking at how much damage is going to occur as a result of this lockdown, how much damage is going to occur as a result of quarantine or isolation, how much damage are we offsetting and how much damage are we doing, right? Because at some point there's that fine line where yes, you may be preventing X amount of deaths from COVID, or you may be preventing the spread of COVID for a certain period of time, but inevitably it's going to hit everyone, right? You're only delaying the inevitable. Everybody's going to get it at some point. And on top of that, you know, if if you have more people killing themselves as a result of depression from isolation, from the lockdown, or depression because they can't, they're going to be evicted from their home and they can't support their families anymore, or they've lost their livelihood, or they don't have anything left, or they're running out of money. These are all major issues that result in depression, and ultimately, it's not glamorous, but ultimately suicide in a lot of cases, and it's very sad to see, and this is why I take what our politicians are doing so seriously, because these are people's lives at stake. Yes, I understand that to some degree, COVID can and is capable of killing people. However, is that going to be offset by the number of people who are going to kill themselves if we force everyone to stay in their homes for 2 weeks? Which, by the way, I'm not okay with. I don't think the government has the authority, and only in extreme circumstance, very, very extreme, unlikely circumstance, do I think that it would be even remotely acceptable for the government to dictate what people can and cannot do. Like, look, this is not an Ebola outbreak. First of all, Ebola is nowhere near as infectious as COVID, so it's not something we have to worry about. But consider this. What if there was a disease like Ebola, okay, which has a 90% mortality rate in third world countries and a 50% mortality rate, roughly, I believe it's like 47 point something percent, but roughly a 50% mortality rate in first world countries where we are actually properly nourished and have access to the best healthcare in the world. Imagine a virus like Ebola that has that high of a mortality rate. Imagine now that it is as infectious as COVID or worse. We have the potential of literally losing half of the American population. I'm talking 165 million Americans disappearing in the matter of weeks. Literally just dying. Okay. Maybe it's okay to force people to stay in their homes at that point, because the potential however many thousand people that might kill themselves is clearly not going to be offset by the 165 million people that will die painful, brutal deaths as a result of the opposite. Now, this is a very dark and morbid way of looking at it, and it's not something I even enjoy thinking about, because ultimately, perhaps it's negligibly altruistic, but I believe that there's always a way to save everyone. I've never been much of a believer in the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. It's a very dangerous mindset to have, and ideology, and usually is pervaded through postmodern neo-Marxist culture, but that's a video for another day. But you understand the greater gist of what I'm trying to say here. The point is that there is a balance, there is a fine line, and then, to be honest, I don't think a lot of our politicians care right now. I think they just want power. I think they want to see how much they can get away with against us before we revolt. And I'm telling you, if you keep pushing the American people, they will. It has been proven over the course of history. They will. Thank you so much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't already, please do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Sharing this video, it really does really help the channel out, and I would personally appreciate it greatly. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, gotta get that money.
Gigi, I've decided not to leave this town. Maybe I can stay and find some other nice people who will like me and accept me for who I am.
Trusting your spirit, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about.